Welcome to my YouTube channel and to my train room. If you were watching a few months ago, you will recall, or you may recall, that I did a video on casting resin crates. Since then, I've had quite a bit of interest from people who want to know more, so I've decided to do another video. Originally, I created this for the Rail Talk Online channel, but unfortunately that died after 3 months. So these two segments that I'm going to do now remain unaired. So I'm just reshooting the introduction. Mold making and casting are very useful skills to have whenever you want a lot of detailed parts the same. There are many ways of doing it. Let me show you how I do it. Here is a selection of the silicone rubber molds that I've made over the years. These first two I use with plaster of Paris, everything else is for resin, although the technique is exactly the same. I have a stone wall with pillars, I have a tunnel portal. I had this large unusable area in the middle, so I also put a stone column in there. It's useful, it doesn't use any more rubber. This next batch of molds are my most recent. Those are to produce a wide variety of resin crates for my harbour scene. I got some detail parts. I've got the pilasters for National Widget. This one in front here was an interesting story. I wanted a large brick arch and I wasn't quite sure how to make it. Anyway, one of the properties of the resin is that it comes out of the molds slightly flexible. So what I did was I took the fresh casting and formed it carefully around a bucket lid. After taping it in place and leaving it for a couple of days, I now have a brick arch. All these white molds here are more than 20 years old. I made those when I was into Dungeons and Dragons. There's even some two-piece molds here. There's one here for a couple of pillars, one square and one round. There's one for a door, an arched doorway in a wall. It's detailed on both sides. Two-piece molds are a little bit more complicated to make. If I get a lot of requests, I will show you how to do a two-piece mold in a future episode. But for this month's installment, we're just going to deal with a simple one-piece mold to cast some resin crates. So stay tuned, I'll just get set up and I will be right back. After getting all our patterns mounted on a sheet of styrene, we need to build a box around it. I'm doing this with strips of styrene. My tallest master is 13 millimeters high, so I'm making the strips 21, gives me 8 millimeters of base. Now I'm just going to leave the solvent to set up just a little bit. While it's going hard, we can work on getting the rubber ready. Before we can mix rubber, we need to know the volume of the mold box. Now I calculated this at 206 cc's. I don't bother subtracting for the patterns because it's a relatively small volume and I'd rather have a little bit left over than be a little bit short. So my goal is to mix up 206 cc's of rubber. Okay. This is Micromark's 1-to-1 Rapid, which is a really easy rubber to use. You just mix equal quantities, pour it in the mold, and let it set up for 4 hours. It's usually good to give it a shake first because sometimes it settles. Also, it doesn't help being in a cold basement. If it's too thick to pour, just put it in the bottle in a bucket of warm water for a few minutes. Improves the situation. It's best to use a release agent. a release spray, particularly in a mould with some fairly deep castings and undercuts, because I don't want anything binding. This is what came in my starter pack, and it seems to be pretty much a lifetime supply. I don't think the can is noticeably lighter now than it was when I first got it, and I've made a lot of mould boxes since then. If you don't want to buy release agent, you can make your own by dissolving a glob of petroleum jelly in white spirits or turpentine, and it works just as well. You just paint that on. The instructions that come with the rubber are really anal when it comes to mixing. They want you to use 3 separate mixing cups and to discard them and use new ones each time. But I found that they're easy to clean out. I'll show you how to do that afterwards. Just make sure there's no dirt or dust inside. It doesn't matter which part we add first. I want a little over 100 cc's. And now for part B, exactly the same thing. Alright, we now have equal quantities of both parts. One thing I find very interesting is that the instructions say to use a square-ended stirring stick, and yet the starter pack comes with round-ended stirrers, as does the resin. Anyway, what we need to do now is to mix this up until it is a completely uniform colour. We don't want to whip the air into it, and need to frequently scrape the sides and the bottom. You'll know when it's properly mixed because there'll be no light or dark streaks in it. And I think that's good enough. Now when we pour it into the mould, we do not want to get air bubbles, especially against the patterns. So the best way to do it is to pour it slowly into one corner. You're just going to pour slowly into one corner like this, and then let the rubber gradually cover the patterns. Anyway, all we can sensibly do now is leave the room and give that time to set up. I don't want to be around here and risk getting impatient. Well, here's my mould all nicely set up. The next thing to do is to get it out of the box. And the way to do that is basically just to tear these sides off. Usually I can't salvage them. And where it's overflowed the edge, just peel that up and tear it away. Whatever you do, do not use a knife on a mould, because the slightest nick will easily propagate into a tear and you'll end up tearing the mould completely in half. Okay, so once most of the sides are off, then I've just got to flex it a little bit, get some air in underneath, work all the way around. If you remember, I have undercuts on some of these patterns. Actually, I have undercuts on all the patterns, so we've got to be very careful that we don't tear the mold. Just ease it off very gently, going all the way around. The rubber is flexible enough that it will stretch over the undercuts. And there we are, one perfect mould. You may notice a few thin slivers of rubber that manage to get between the pattern and the base. They can just be pulled off with tweezers. They really don't make any difference at all. Even if you leave them on, they won't actually affect your castings. Regarding the cleanup of the utensils, it's about as easy as any cleanup job you're ever going to have. Just pull it out. We just peel it off. I suppose I should issue a warning. Don't ever try to clean up your rubber before it's completely set. All you'll do that way is make a mess. Alright, so let's just clear everything away. And the next thing we'll do is start making castings. Well, that's all for this month's installment. Next month I will show you how to make resin castings using the molds. I'll also talk a little bit about product choices. There are a lot of different products, a lot of rubbers and a lot of resins available. I'll show you what I use and why. So stay tuned and I will see you next month. Thanks for watching.